to educate the public about the impact of tuberculosis and raise public awareness about devastating health, social, and economic consequences of tuberculosis and step up efforts to end the global TB epidemic. In this regard, ang ating public health unit, in partnership with the Department of Pediatrics and the Philippine Pediatric Society Northern Luzon Chapter, is conducting your Usapang Salun-at sa Komunidad Special Edition na may temang TB in celebration of the World TB Day na ginugunita po natin tuwing Marso 24. This session aims to increase awareness among the participants on the detection, prevention, management, and updates of childhood tuberculosis. Specifically, at the end of this webinar, matututo po tayo regarding the updates on childhood tuberculosis and the nutritional buildup in patients with tuberculosis, and for us to understand the screening, prevention, and management of tuberculosis, and for us to apply the learnings from this webinar to our respective community. With that, welcome po sa ating special edition ng ating Usapang Salun-at sa Komunidad. And to formally start, may we start our webinar with the opening with a prayer and the singing of the national anthem and the PPS hymn.
Let us bow our heads and put ourselves in the presence of the Lord. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for gathering all of us today. May you bestow your guidance and blessings so that we can enjoy and appreciate its significance in our lives. Bless everyone who are present here today, that each one of us may be able to share our knowledge, understanding, and wisdom for your glory and honor. May the various activities related to this event be a success through your intervention. We all ask of this in the mighty name of Jesus. Amen. Let us bow our heads and put
Mga kababayan, ang pambansang awit ng Pilipinas.
Kayang mag-ibig, telas ng silanganan, alam ng puso, sa titik mo'y buhay. Upang hinirang, kuyak ka ng magiting, sa manlulupi, di ka pasisigil, sa nagagang putok sa simoy at sa langit ang bangaw, ay hinatang tulang awit sa pagkayang minamahal. Ang isang ng matawad mo'y tagumpay na nagtitigil, ang bituin na karoon niya kailan pang ay di magtitigil. Luman ang araw ng walhating pagsinta, buhay langit sa piling mo. Ang bigaya ng pagkay mga amin, ang mamatay ng
To our participants, just a few reminders po, no? While the lecture and discussion is ongoing, may we request all of you to kindly mute your microphone. Later on, we'll be having the open forum portion. So kung meron po kayong katanungan sa mga i-discuss po ngayong araw, ay pwede po kayong magtanong sa ating mga eksperto. And also, we'll be giving you your individual certificate of participation as long as you will be answering the evaluation na forward po namin maya-maya lamang sa ating chat box. And may I request also everyone to kindly open their camera for photo documentation purposes while I am acknowledging our participants for this afternoon's activity. While waiting for others, okay, so at the moment, we are 66 in our virtual room, but for the registration, we are 153. Okay, so our participants for today, meron po tayong mga kasamahan mula sa iba't ibang probinsya ng rehiyong Cordillera. Diyan po ang ating mga kasamahan po sa probinsya ng Benguet, probinsya ng Ifugao, Mountain Province, and Abra, ang ating mga kasamahang barangay health workers po, no, ng syudad ng Baguio, at kasamahan po natin dito sa hospital ng mga empleyado. Of course, I would like to acknowledge also yung mga kasama po nating mga pediatricians po mula po sa Philippine Pediatric Society Northern Luzon Chapter. Magandang hapon po sa ating lahat. And at this moment po, may we now listen to the opening remarks of the head of the Public Health Unit of Baguio General Hospital and Medical Center. I'm now giving the virtual floor to Dr. Leamor D. Fangonilo. Good afternoon, Doktora.
Hi, good afternoon. So, you hear me? Okay. Naririnig ba ako, Ryan?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So, magandang araw po sa ating lahat. Ang Marso 24 ay tinaguri ang World TB Day. And this year's national brand campaign, Tayo'y Magbayanihan, TB Tuldukan, ay nagsisilbing panawagan sa lahat na magtulungan sa anumang paraan upang labanan ang sakit na TB. Ang TB ay kailangan nating mawakasan. So lubos po ako nagagalak sa hapong ito dahil sa pagkakataong naibigay sa atin upang magsama-sama at magsanib puwersa ang ating mga organisasyon, the Department of Pediatrics, Public Health Unit ng Baguio General Hospital and Medical Center, at ang Philippine Pediatric Society Northern Luzon Chapter, specifically Baguio Benguet Cluster, para sa isang webinar in celebration of World TB Day na ang layunin ay pasiglahin ng bawat miyembro ng iba't ibang ahensya, mapapubliko o pribado, at mga stakeholders sa ating pagsikap ng TB. Malaki ang epekto ng sakit na ito at di lamang sa ating kalusugan at ang ating mga kabataan at pati ang ating mga kabataan at mga bata at mga nakakatanda. Isa rin po ang nagiging problema dito yung tinatawag nating financial burden na kasama nito sa ating mga pamilyang Pilipino. So tulad ng mga salita ng ating OIC Secretary ng Kagawaran ng Kalusugan, nananatili na ang TB ay malaking hamon para sa ating hinaharap upang sana ay sa hamon na ito ay sana makamit natin ang TB-free Philippines sa pamamagitan ng ating pagbabayanihan. So through complementation of various disciplines and organizations, public and private sectors and partners, we can leverage our resources, expertise, and knowledge in addressing the various consequences of tuberculosis. Ngayon pa lang, nais ko na pong pasalamatan ang mga organizers sa webinar na ito from the Department of Pediatrics and of course from the Public Health Unit. So sa ngalan po ng Public Health Unit at Philippine Pediatric Society, we welcome you all, dear pediatricians, healthcare workers, and the community In this Usapang Salun-at sa Komunidad Special Edition, ito ay ukol sa TB. Maraming salamat.
Thank you, Dr. Leamor Di Fangonilo, ang aming head po ng Public Health Unit dito sa Baguio General Hospital and Medical Center. Before we continue with the next part of this activity, just a few reminder again to our participants po na mga doctors will be forwarding a link po for your attendance. No? Kailangan i-chat po natin dito i-message po natin dito sa ating chat box. So meron po tayong link para sa ating mga doctors who are joining us this afternoon. And to introduce our resource speaker this afternoon, so allow me first to introduce her. So isa po siyang pediatric pulmonologist ng Department of Pediatrics ng St. St. Louis University Hospital of Sacred Heart, and isa po siyang past BOD of Philippine Pediatric Society Northern Luzon Chapter. To introduce our resource speakers, I'm now giving the virtual floor to Dr. Jeremy Marie A. Del Rosario. Good afternoon, Doktora.
Hello, good afternoon, sir. Kumusta po kayo? I'm Dr. Del Rosario po, and I will be your moderator for today. So we are very fortunate po that we are having this lecture as tuberculosis po is still very common here in the Philippines. So join us today as we hear from our experts and as they walk us through the different updates po on tuberculosis. So to introduce our first speaker, I would like to welcome Dr. Karine Somera. Like me, she is also a pediatric pulmonologist. Now, pero galing po siya ng Baguio General Hospital. So to talk about different updates on childhood tuberculosis, I'd like to give you the floor to Dr. Karine Somera.
Thank you, Dr. Jet. Would just like to share my screen. Yeah,
Okay, so while waiting for Dr. Karine, konting patalastas lang po. So our audience, no, next month, April 19, we are also celebrating the Head and Neck Consciousness Week. So yun po yung magiging konsentrasyon ng ating regular session, that is our regular session 4. So that is on April 19. Pag-uusapan po natin ang patungkol sa head and neck diseases. So ipopost rin po namin maya-maya lamang sa ating chat box ang ating registration link. At pwede na po kayong magrehistro. Ito po ay libre. Now, we are giving the virtual floor again, once again, to Dr. Karine Somera. Doktora.
good afternoon. Sorry, I'm using the laptop of Dr. Arlie, my partner here today. So good afternoon to everyone. So I would be focusing the lecture for this afternoon regarding the updates on childhood tuberculosis. TB remains to be a major cause of morbidity and one of the leading causes of death worldwide. Until the COVID-19 pandemic, TB was the leading cause of death and AIDS. So the objectives of this TB lecture are to discuss the epidemiology and health burden of TB globally and in the Philippines, to provide updates on the screening, diagnosis, treatment in children, and to those with special conditions. And lastly, to identify challenges to TB control globally and in the Philippines. So an estimated 10.6 million people fell ill with TB in 2021, an increase of 4.5% from 2020. This means that one person every 3 seconds fall ill with TB. Of the 10 million, 1.2 were children. Globally, in 2021, an estimated 2.2 million incident cases of TB were attributable to undernourishment, 0.86 million to HIV infection, 0.74 to alcohol use disorders, 0.63 million to smoking, and 0.37 million to diabetes. So children who are diagnosed with TB disease through screening should have nutrition screening and assessment as well. If malnutrition is identified, it should be managed accordingly to the WHO recommendations on nutritional care and support for people with TB, which will be elaborated subsequently later by Dr. Valderas. So, the burden of TB-resistant, drug-resistant TB is also estimated to have increased between 20 and 2021, with 450,000 new cases of rifampicin-resistant tuberculosis in 2021. The COVID-19 pandemic continues to have a damaging impact to access to TB diagnosis and treatment. So in 2021, there were increased deaths and disease in TB deaths and diseases increased. Fewer people were also diagnosed and treated with TB preventable treatment, and fewer resources were directed to TB services as they were redirected to the COVID-19 pandemic. So the most obvious and immediate impact was a large drop in the reported newly diagnosed cases of TB. So from the peak of 7.1 million in 2019, this fell to a 5.8 million in 2020. But still accounted for 60% of the global reduction compared to that of 2019. So the three countries that accounted for the most of the reduction in 2020 of the reduction globally. These countries made a partial recovery in 2021, but still accounted for 60% of the global reduction compared in the year 2019. So the 2022 global report was also identified the 30 high burden countries for TB, TB-HIV co-infection, and MDR and rifampicin-resistant TB. So this list is to be used by the WHO in the period of 2021 to 2025. So notice that the Philippines is included under the three categories, along with China, Indonesia, India, Mozambique, Myanmar, Nigeria, South Africa, and Zambia. So these slides show the increasing trend in the incidence of TB, drug-resistant TB, and TB in HIV co-infection, with the number of patients on treatment and successfully treated lagging behind. In 2020, the Philippines had more than 500,000 of TB cases, and 11% of these were children. So children and young adolescents aged below 15 years represents 11% of all people with tuberculosis globally. This means that 1.1 million children become ill with TB every year, and almost half of them below 5 years of age. Furthermore, 16% of the estimated 1.4 million deaths of TB in 2019 belong to this age group. So this relatively high share of mortality in children highlights the urgent need for improved case detection and subsequent access to preventive and curative treatment in this age group, particularly for those at higher risk. The systematic screening for TB disease is defined as the systematic identification of people at risk for TB disease in a predetermined target group by assessing symptoms and using tests, examinations, and other procedures that can be applied to them rapidly. So this is provider initiated, and it aims to identify presumptive TB, leading to prompt diagnosis of these TB cases. So the systematic screening for TB disease can be done to people who seek healthcare with or without symptoms or signs of compatible with TB. Those people who do not seek care because they do not perceive that they have health problems that warrants medical attention. And we can also do screening to help identify people who are at particularly high risk of developing TB disease, thus may require repeat screening. So for this, we particularly screen children, and especially so what are the recommended tools for screening? So we have the WHO recommended symptom screen, chest x-ray, and molecular WHO recommended rapid diagnostic tests, which will be given later on. So how do we screen for active pulmonary TB in adults? In adults more than 15 years with unknown HIV infection. So first, we have to ask the patient if he or she is experiencing one of the WHO recommended symptom screen, cough for more than 2 weeks, unexplained fever, unexplained weight loss, and night sweats. If they answered at least one of the four, we already identify them as presumptive TB. If the patient answered no to all, to all the questions for the symptom screen, we can ask for chest X-ray if done for the past year, or if not, we can offer an X-ray. So we can check the X-ray for findings suggestive of TB, and if they are present, we can again tag the patient as presumptive TB. So for screening for those of active pulmonary disease among less than 15 years old. So first, again, we do symptom screening by asking the presence of at least one of the following: unexplained cough or wheezing, not responding to antibiotics and bronchodilators, unexplained fever after ruling out other causes, unexplained weight loss, or failure to thrive despite nutritional therapy. And among pediatric TB contacts, even without signs and symptoms, the presence of 2 weeks fatigue, decreased activity and playfulness, and poor appetite is already considered as presumptive TB. If chest X-ray is available, we check for chest X-ray findings suggestive of TB. And we go further through the algorithm and collect for sputum or extrapulmonary samples for bacteriologic testing. So these are the radiographic findings suggestive of TB: enlarged and equal hilar lymph glands, miliary mottling, pleural or pericardial effusion, apical opacity with cavitation, atelectasis, consolidation, reticular or nodular infiltrates. And we also do screening for extrapulmonary TB. So we ask for the following symptoms and signs in our patients. So after we have identified our patient TB master list, and for all these patients identified as presumptive TB, we ask about their tendency to have drug-resistant tuberculosis. So how do we go about this? We ask for previous history of TB treatment, close contact of a known drug-resistant TB case, and we asked if there are non-converter of drug-susceptible TB regimen. So after this, we check for bacteriologic confirmation. So we ask them to submit specimen for to confirm the diagnosis of TB disease. So what are the updates from the WHO new recommendations, specifically in Module 5, pertaining to the management of tuberculosis in children and adolescents? So they have recommended the use of expert MTB Reef Ultra for the detection of TB disease in gastric aspirate and stool specimens for the diagnosis of pulmonary TB and rifampicin resistance. So in children with signs and symptoms of pulmonary TB, expert ultra should be used as an initial diagnostic test for TB and detection of rifampicin resistance on sputum, nasopharyngeal aspirate, gastric aspirate, or stool, rather than smear microscopy, culture, or phenotypic drug susceptible testing. So they give this a strong recommendation and moderate certainty of evidence of test accuracy in stool and gastric aspirate. So they have checked the sensitivity and specificity of this expert ultra for the gastric aspirate and stool samples of pediatric patients aged 0 to 9 years old. So they have found that for gastric aspirate, it has a sensitivity of 64% and specificity of 95%. For the stool specimen, they have 53% sensitivity and 98% specificity. So there were no studies on the diagnostic accuracy for detection of rifampicin resistance in both gastric aspirate and stool specimen. The conclusions were based in adult studies. So they have recommended that the false negative results should be interpreted within the clinical context of the patient, and clinicians should not solely use a negative test to rule out the disease or rifampicin resistance for this matter. So other recommendations for the use of expert MTB Reef and expert Ultra are the use for the details recommended that cerebrospinal fluid be used as an initial diagnostic test for TB meningitis rather than smear microscopy and culture. They gave it strong recommendation and moderate certainty of evidence for test accuracy. So they also recommended expert ultra for patients with symptoms of extrapulmonary TB and lymph node aspirates, lymph node biopsy, pleural fluid, peritoneal fluid, and pericardial fluid, or urine specimens may be subjected to expert ultra, having conditional recommendation and moderate certainty of evidence for test accuracy. So in adults and children with signs and symptoms of extrapulmonary TB, expert ultra should be used for rifampicin resistance detection rather than culture and phenotypic drug susceptible tests. They also recommend expert ultra or expert MTB Reef to be used for patients with HIV, adults and children with signs of disseminated TB. And the specimen to be used is blood as an initial diagnostic test for disseminated TB. So for as an initial test for pulmonary TB in adults in general population, either with signs and symptoms of TB or chest radiograph with lung abnormality findings, expert MTB Reef and expert ultra may replace culture as the initial test for pulmonary TB. And furthermore, one expert ultra test may be used rather than two expert ultra tests as initial tests for pulmonary TB. And adolescents and adults adults and adolescents more than 15 years are recommended to have this as well. So another update that was given by the Module 5 of the WHO is regarding the TB treatment of TB disease in children. So once we have identified our patients with active TB disease, we now go to the treatment. So this is the previous recommendation. So we usually give for pulmonary TB and extrapulmonary TB, except for CNS, bones, and joints. We give the 6-month regimen. So 2 months of intensive phase for isoniazid, rifampicin, pyrazinamide, and ethambutol, and the subsequent maintenance phase with 4 months of recommended a treatment shortening in children and adolescents with non-severe TB. So they did this recommendation for children and adolescents between 3 months and 16 years of age with non-severe TB without suspicion or evidence of multi-drug resistance or rifampicin resistance TB. So a 4-month treatment regimen may be given. So this comprises of the 2 months intensive phase of HRZ with or without ethambutol and 2 months of HR. So the non-severe TB is defined as those with peripheral lymph node TB, intrathoracic lymph node TB without airway obstruction, uncomplicated TB pleural effusion or positive bacillary, non-cavitary disease, confined to one lobe of the lungs, and without miliary pattern. So in identifying non-severe TB patients, we really have to make use of chest X-ray, both PA and lateral view to detect if the patient falls under the non-severe TB classification. So there's a clause here that ethambutol may or may not be given. So they have recommended that the use of ethambutol in the first 2 months of treatment is recommended in settings with high prevalence of HIV or of isoniazid resistance. So this can hold true in our local setting in the Philippines because we are again under the 3 high burden countries for this HIV and TB co-infection. So these recommendations were from the SHINE trial, the shorter treatment for minimal tuberculosis in children, which is a multi-center, open-label, parallel group, non-inferiority, randomized controlled, and 2-arm trial. So they have conducted this in children aged less than 16 years with minimal TB. So they randomized them to two arms. Those would be given for month or 8 weeks of HRZ plus minus ethambutol and an 8 weeks duration of HRC. 6 months of treatment for the continuation. So after 72 weeks follow-up for primary outcome assessment, prescribed as per WHO 2014 dosing guidelines were used. So they have seen that the children with peripheral lymph node TB, the SHINE trial results had no difference in proportion of unfavorable outcomes between these 2 arms. So it was found out that the 16 weeks or the shorter treatment was non-inferior compared to the 6 months or 24 weeks of treatment among children with both peripheral and peripheral lymph node disease, and pulmonary disease. So this may provide reassurance to us clinicians regarding the seemingly delayed clinical response of TB treatment for those with peripheral lymph node TB, where lymph nodes remain enlarged even after treatment. So the recommendations also for children and adolescents living with HIV infection. So these children and adolescents will need to be monitored closely, especially at 4 months of treatment, and the treatment may be extended to 6 months if there are the symptoms or the patients do not respond to the short course treatment. Yeah. So they did another subgroup consideration for children with severe acute malnutrition. They have defined these patients with weight for height and z-score of less than -3 or a MUAC of less than 115 millimeters. So based on the trial, there is insufficient evidence for this subgroup analysis, and for these patients, severe acute malnutrition is already considered a danger sign. Therefore, children with severe acute malnutrition and non-severe TB should still be receiving 6 months of the TB treatment. For infants less than 3 months of age and for those weighing less than 3 kilograms, they were not eligible for the inclusion in this trial, so no data on the treatment of congenital TB, and very young infants were done. So they should promptly be treated with 6 months regimen. And for the children treated for TB in the past 2 years, patients, they were not eligible for the inclusion for the SHINE trial, and they should be treated with 6-month treatment. So for the monitoring and evaluation, they have noted that the clinical monitoring requirements for shorter regimen remains the same for like that of the 6-month regimen. So the treatment outcomes are determined at the end of the 4-month regimen. So this is the previous and recommended follow-up for patients. So we check for new TB cases. So at the end of the intensive phase at 2 months, we check and follow up for these patients. And also, if after 2 months of the maintenance phase, we again check for treatment failure or treatment success for these patients. So should there be an insufficient clinical improvement after the completion of the 4-month regimen, the clinician may decide to extend treatment to 6 months while considering alternative diagnosis, including drug-resistant TB. And monitoring for potential relapse is a priority for shorter regimens, especially when they are introduced into programmatic settings. So therefore, follow-up for children and young adolescents for up to 12 months after completion of the 4-month regimen is important. So basically, the progress made in the years up to 2019 has slowed, stalled, and reversed, and the global TB targets are off track, mainly because of the COVID-19 pandemic. This is still the main effect of or impact of the COVID-19 pandemic to tuberculosis. So these are the global targets we have for the previous year. So for the TB treatment of all ages, we only had 66% or 26.3 million of all the TB cases who were successfully treated. And for TB treatment in children, years 2018 to 2021. And for those people living with HIV, only 46% accessed life-saving antiretroviral therapy for the past years. So for our milestones for the TB incidents, we still have a lot to go through because our target of 50% reduction in the year between the years 2015 to 2025, we only succeeded for 10% reduction. And for the number of deaths, we aimed for 75%, and in 2021, we only were able to reduce TB deaths in, almost 6%. So in summary, the current status of TB globally and in the Philippines were presented earlier, and updates on the screening, diagnosis, and TB treatments were presented to us as the recommendation of the WHO in the year 2021. So we are still facing challenges and we are really far from our TB targets. So we are hoping that we will be won in this war against TB. So we may be 4 days late from the World TB Day last March 2024, 2023. But we hope that after this lecture, we become advocates and we resound and we have conviction in saying that yes, we can really end TB. So thank you for your time, and for the organizing committee and for the public health unit of BGH. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Karine, for that very short yet very brief and very concise lecture you had regarding the different updates on tuberculosis, especially the treatment. Now we're down to our next speaker. So our next speaker is a graduate of BS Biology at the St. Louis University and a Doctor of Medicine also in the same institution. So she had her residency training at the Baguio General Hospital and Medical Center, and she had her training in medical nutrition at St. Luke's Medical Center. Currently, she is a medical officer at the Baguio General Hospital and Medical Center. So friends, this is all welcome to talk about nutritional buildup in children with tuberculosis. I give you the virtual floor to Dr. Arlie Balderas.
Thank you, Project. Let me share my screen po. Wait lang. Stop. Yan. Ayan. Stop. Okay. Share. Okay, so good afternoon to everyone, all here present in this meeting. So thank you to the organizing committee for the opportunity to speak on the assigned topic on this year's celebration of World TB Day. So when we talk of TB, we immediately think of the screening, diagnosis, the phases of treatment, drug resistance, or adverse reactions, if any. At times, we forget the importance of nutrition in the holistic management of the patient. So let us walk through this topic on nutritional support in tuberculosis with our main objective of reviewing the guideline on the nutritional care and support for patients with tuberculosis as provided for by the World Health Organization. So this is just a reiteration of what has been mentioned by Dr. Samera on the TB burden worldwide. So in the Global Tuberculosis Report in 2022 by the WHO, sorry po, may technical problem lang. Okay, sorry for the technical problem. So to continue, in the global tuberculosis, there was an estimated total of 10.6 million people who fell ill with TB in 2021, equivalent to 134 cases per 100,000 population, and 1.2 million of these are children. So child and adolescent TB is often overlooked by health providers and can be difficult to diagnose and treat. Globally, TB is the 13th leading cause of death. And of the estimated 10.6 million who fell ill, only 6.4 million were detected and notified, leading to a gap of 4.2 million cases. Ending the TB epidemic by 2030 is one of the health targets of the Sustainable Development Goals. 8 countries accounted for more than 2/3 of global TB cases, and the Philippines ranks 4th after India, Indonesia, and China, respectively. And TB is the top infectious killer, and nearly 70 Filipinos die every day from this curable disease. TB leads the patient to malnutrition and increases the risk of developing active TB by 6 to 10 times. Additionally, malnutrition increases TB relapse and mortality. 1/4 of TB in the world was as a result of malnutrition. And improving the nutritional status of the individual greatly reduces the risk of tuberculosis. This figure shows the bidirectional interaction of tuberculosis and malnutrition and some putative mechanisms. This bidirectional relationship between TB and nutrition is well recognized. So primary undernutrition is a risk factor for developing TB disease, while TB results in wasting. Although nutrition support is acknowledged as an important intervention in TB programs, it is seldom afforded commensurate priority for action. Malnutrition in TB patients will cause a problem in the outcome of TB treatment. It includes worsening of the disease, delayed sputum conversion, and increased risk of mortality. Other problems include drug-induced hepatotoxicity, increased rate of relapse, and persistence of positive cultures in multi-drug resistant TB. Benefits of nutritional support for tuberculosis patients include improved body weight, increase in adherence and compliance to the TB treatment, and increase in the success of the treatment. The role of nutrition in the overall management of TB cannot be overemphasized. Therefore, nutrition support in TB is necessary. TB patients have reduced appetite. So as one of the major signals of energy status, leptin levels influence appetite, satiety, and motivated behaviors. This figure explains the hypothesized role of leptin in tuberculosis. The inflammatory response in tuberculosis may reduce leptin production directly and through loss of body fat mass and decreased energy intake. And suppressed leptin production may contribute to decreased cell-mediated immunity, therefore increased morbidity and mortality. In addition, anorexia resulting to wasting or cachexia may contribute to a worse disease outcome. The disease then reduces the body's ability to absorb nutrients, and the cycle continues. Most individuals with active TB are in a catabolic state and experience weight loss. So in patients with TB, it leads to reduction in appetite, nutrient malabsorption, micronutrient malabsorption, and altered metabolism, leading to wasting. TB is a major cause of poverty aggravation because people with TB often face the double burden of reduced income and increased expenses. They are often too sick to work, and their families have to pay expenses associated with treatment. This implies the need to strongly advocate for better strategies to prevent and control TB and to help countries end the epidemic of TB by 2030. Energy needs of TB patients are increased because of the disease itself. There is energy intake and expenditure mismatch, and TB patients oxidize a greater proportion of ingested amino acids, indicating a reduced anabolic response to food, or what the so-called anabolic block. Only underweight was significantly associated with higher risks of TB-specific and non-TB-specific mortality during treatment. This higher mortality among underweight TB patients may be due to decreased immunity and the greater severity of TB infection in this population. Food insecurity is emerging as an important barrier to adherence to care and treatment recommendations. Poverty and food insecurity are both causes and consequences of TB, and those involved in TB care therefore play an important role in recognizing and addressing these wider socioeconomic issues. Thus, a guideline was formulated for utilization by the WHO member states, and this guideline provides guidance on the principles and evidence-informed recommendations on the nutritional care and support for patients with tuberculosis in support of their efforts to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. The objective is to provide guidance on nutritional assessment, advice, and treatment for integration into clinical care for people with TB. The recommendations are grouped on areas related to namely nutrition assessment and counseling, macro and micronutrient supplementation, management of severe acute malnutrition and moderate acute malnutrition, and with additional area for contact investigation. Because of the clear bidirectional causal link between undernutrition and active TB, nutrition screening, assessment, and management are integral components of TB treatment and care. Nutrition assessment, to include anthropometric, biochemical, clinical, and dietary data, is a prerequisite for the provision of good nutritional care. The results from screening and assessment inform counseling, which is usually done at the time of diagnosis and throughout treatment. So at time of diagnosis, the following should be evaluated: age-appropriate anthropometric measurements and classification of nutrition status to include the height or length and weight, and MUWAC for children less than 5 years old and for pregnant women. History of weight loss and signs of undernutrition such as visible wasting or edema. Clinical assessment for comorbid conditions and concurrent treatments, and diet assessment if nutritional status indicates malnutrition. In patients classified as having moderate undernutrition or severe acute malnutrition, further risk factor and dietary assessment will be necessary, such as poor TB treatment adherence and or response or resistance to TB drugs, clinical assessment for Other non-dietary causes of malnutrition, including identification of important comorbidities like HIV, diabetes mellitus, or alcohol or drug abuse. Biochemical assessment, most commonly for anemia and serum albumin, and dietary assessment, including assessment of food security. So the goal of nutrition is to improve the dietary intake during recovery, to compensate for the increase in energy expenditure associated with recovery and weight regain, support the increase in cellular production and immune responses, support repair of damaged and diseased tissues, and manage symptoms and side effects of TB drugs such as nausea and vomiting, anorexia, diarrhea, and altered taste. Nutritional counseling, advice, and support may have to be adjusted to the specific nutritional requirements of other comorbid conditions. An adequate diet containing all essential macro and micronutrients is necessary for the well-being and health of all people, including those with TB infection or TB disease. Nutritional status is an important determinant of resistance to infection. Haha.
Walang internet.
Ano walang internet ko?
Internet po ba ang ano? Or web?
Okay na, Doc. You may take the floor once again po.
Can't hear you, Doc. I
Wait
can
lang.
hear you po,
Okay.
but wala lang yung slides pa.
Ayun, ito na lang yata.
Ayan.
Yan. Wait.
Ayan. Okay. Ayan po. Kita na po.
Yes po.
Okay, thank you, Doc. So going back, there is currently no evidence to suggest that the proportion of dietary energy from macronutrients like the protein, carbohydrate, and fat, otherwise known as macronutrient distribution, is different for people with active TB than for those without TB. It is generally recommended that all people consume approximately 15 to 30% of energy as protein, 25 to 35% as fat, and 45 to 65% as carbohydrate. Vitamins A, C, D, E, B6, and folic acid, and the minerals zinc, copper, selenium, and iron all play key roles in metabolic pathways, cellular function, and immune function. So the concentration of these nutrients have a role in an individual's defense against TB. Practical ways to meet macro and micronutrient requirements through locally available and culturally appropriate foods should be provided. So for the pediatric population, this is the recommended AMDR. So acceptable macronutrient distribution, or AMDR, is the range of intake for a particular energy source that is associated with reduced risk of chronic disease while providing intakes of essential nutrients. The healthy food plate for a specific age group, or the Pinggang Pinoy, completes the messages of the pyramid by showing adequate distribution of nutritious foods in a meal, make healthy food choices, and be physically active. It is also important on chrononutrition, or it is not only is important, but also entrains the human body clock. So it's in particular vitamins and optional snacks in between, eating every 3 to 4 hours. Severe acute malnutrition is a common cause of morbidity and mortality in many settings. Nutritional therapy aims to reduce the risk of death, shorten hospitalization, and facilitate rehabilitation and a full recovery. Children who are less than 5 years of age, school-age children and adolescents 5 to 19 years, and adults, including pregnant and lactating women with active TB and severe acute malnutrition, should be treated in accordance with the WHO recommendations. The Department of Health has a program on the Philippine Integrated Management of Acute Malnutrition, and this is the Manual of Operations, in accordance with WHO recommendations for definition and treatment of SAM. In 2012, WHO published a technical note on supplementary foods for the management of moderate acute malnutrition in infants and children 6 to 59 months of age. So in situations of food shortage or where some nutrients are not sufficiently available through local foods, especially formulated supplementary foods are usually required to supplement the regular diet. For those cases, the technical note provides orientation on the composition of supplementary foods. The current recommendation for moderate undernutrition in adolescents and adults is to provide supplemental foods in the outpatient setting until BMI is normalized. The approach that individuals with moderate undernutrition have different nutritional needs than either people with undernutrition or those with severe acute malnutrition. So for most people with active TB, assuming sufficient food is available, effective TB therapy will improve nutritional status by improving appetite and food intake, reducing energy and nutrient demands, and improving metabolic efficiency. This is a WHO's technical note on supplementary foods for the management of MAM in infants and children 6 to 59 months of age. This table will help us differentiate MAM from SAM after plotting our data with the WHO growth standards. In settings where contact tracing is implemented, household contacts of people with active TB should have a nutritional screening and assessment as part of contact investigation. This is to a higher risk of disease progression independent of malnutrition. If malnutrition is identified, it should be managed according to WHO recommendations. Nutrition screening and assessment can identify high-risk contacts or require rigorous evaluation for active and latent TB. It is necessary to invest in TB. All essential elements of TB diagnosis and treatment should be provided free of charge to patients in order to improve access to treatment and minimize the financial burden of the TB treatment on patients and households. Because of the clear bidirectional causal link between undernutrition and active TB, nutrition screening, assessment, and management are integral components of TB treatment and care. An adequate diet containing all essential macronutrients and micronutrients is necessary for the well-being and health of all people, including those with TB infection or TB disease. Concerns about weight loss or failure to gain weight should trigger further clinical assessment, like resistance to TB drugs, poor adherence, or presence of comorbid conditions, and nutrition assessment in order to determine the most appropriate interventions. Closer nutritional monitoring and earlier initiation of nutrition support, even before the first 2 months of TB treatment are completed, should be considered if a nutritional indicator is approaching the cutoff value for a diagnosis of severe undernutrition. Food insecurity can contribute to poor access and adherence to TB treatment. Interventions that address food security may improve access and adherence to TB treatment, as well as to support nutritional recovery through provision of nutritious foods. TB is present in all countries and age groups, but TB is curable and preventable. So government worldwide must seize this opportunity to adopt better strategies to fight TB, invest more in it, above all, build resilient systems for integrated efforts toward universal health care. So proper nutrition is one of the ways of preventing TB. Yes, we can end TB. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Arlie Balderas, for that equally very informative lecture, like Dr. Sameras. So before we proceed to the question and answer portion, I'd just like to remind our PPS members to please check the link. It was sent at the chat box, so please check the link for your attendance. So very important po ito sa atin, itong link na ito, as we will be given 2 CME points for this lecture. Okay, so we have a few questions here. The first question is from Dr. Catherine Gomez. I think this question is for Dr. Samera. Dr. Karin, Dr. Gomez is asking if the RIF Ultra is available in our in BGH, and how much, and who's the contact person in charge. And
Yes, ma'am. Good
follow-up
afternoon.
question, Dr. Yeah, sorry, Dr. Karin. Follow-up question lang po. Maybe we can enlighten them on the difference between the Ultra and the usual natin na gene expert.
Okay, good afternoon, ma'am, and thank you for that. Yes, we do have now in BGH in our TB dots Gene Expert Ultra, and we are using it now. The process would be just send your patients here with proper referral, proper lab request, and also those documents that would support the TB diagnosis. For example, if you have had your patients undergone X-rays, chest X-rays, or TST. So the tests are done and then free of charge, even if they are from private patients, from private physicians. So in their WHO recommendation, the TB Ultra actually, both gene experts have the same parang analysis for the gene sequence of the TB bacterium, but this has more sensitivity and specificity, especially to those specimens that were mentioned earlier, for the gastric aspirate and stool specimen, for children who are posibacillary or who were not able to expect to read or give specimens for sputum and nasopharyngeal aspirates.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Karin. Follow-up question lang to that is, can you tell us about your experience in BGH on the stool na specimen as diagnosing dun sa ano po, sa expert?
Okay, for our local experience, for now we were not able to parang most of the specimens sent are gastric aspirates, so stool specimens are least likely given by patients, the laboratory. So for the stool, we have limited experience with that.
Yeah, well, the reason why I'm asking that, Dr. Soler, is because a lot of pediatricians here might actually prefer that instead of, kasi di ba, yung maglalagay ka pa ng NGT for the gastric aspirate, that's very traumatic for children. And baka kasi yun yung question nila na yung experience so we can request it to our patients. All right. Okay.
But
We have
yes,
a
ma'am, but
question
we do.
here.
I
Yes.
sorry, Jay. But we
Yes, sure.
the personals in our TB that's also advocate to either submit for those patients if they can bring the patient for gastric aspirate for stool specimen as well. So but most of the patients just go there and have gastric aspirate or nasopharyngeal aspirate done.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Sumera. We have a question here for Dr. Balderas. Ma'am, Doctora, hello, good afternoon po.
Good
We
afternoon
offer
po.
nutritional counseling po in BGH sa mga patients natin with tuberculosis and probably the schedule so we can send our patients there for nutritional counseling. But we have mentioned kanina po that really the key is proper nutrition. But since you have enumerated there yung mga percentages po ng macronutrients, siguro medyo toxic sa mga pediatricians to compute pa the caloric requirements, mga ganyan. So do you offer that in BGH po?
Yes, Doctora, we have our nutrition clinic every Wednesday afternoon. So we only not cater to our TB patients, but also those pediatric patients with other comorbid conditions. Yes po. And then we have our nutritionist dietitians who help us also with the computation of the different macronutrient requirements.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Balderas. Do you
Thank
still
you
have
po.
questions here? I can't see any questions from the chat box anymore, but I'd like to ask a question din pala for both of you sa BGH po because we're having problems with ethambutol sa mga health centers natin. And is it really out of stock? Or baka sa mga napupuntahan lang ng pasyente namin? Mahirap talaga, no? Ethambutol.
Ay, opo, mahirap. Pero from last year's experience and up to this month naman po, meron naman po kaming ethambutol na ibibigay for patients. Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Corinne, last. Habang naghihintay tayo ng question dito. I know it is very difficult to lecture on updates regarding tuberculosis na treatment when in fact the PPS has not actually proposed that yet. Diba? Parang, so as PPS members and as pediatricians, medyo hesitant sila to try this. Diba?
During the
I think you're
actually
on mute,
going over them.
Yeah, I can hear you now. Sorry.
Okay. Going through the recommendations, then actually it's also difficult because first, although we are considered as one of the TB high burden countries, then under the TB HIV co-infection and TB resistance, and the countries that were included in the study, in the SHINE study, also belong to that subgroups or that TB high burden country. But of course, we still do need to at least rely with our local settings, especially that yun nga po, mataas talaga yung burden natin of TB, HIV din, and drug resistance also. So actually sa Western Pacific, talagang Philippines is severely endemic of this subcategories of the TB. So probably PPS can spearhead along with PHP and PAPP to probably have further studies to tailor fit our local population in the Philippines.
Yeah, thank you. Very well said, Dr.
Actually,
Sumera.
this is actually a very good news and very good recommendation to decrease the TB burden in our country, both financially for our country and in the number of TB cases and patients, especially in pediatrics age group.
Yeah, thank you very much. So we have another question from the chat box. It says, if a child has primary complex now after medications for 6 months, is the child still vulnerable or is still at risk for future infection again with tuberculosis. That's from Virgie Sestona.
Yes, ma'am.
So
Especially
after
if
treatment.
after treatment, primary or for our latent TB or primary complex, there's still the risk of patients developing TB disease or reactivation, especially when the patient is subjected to this risk factors, malnutrition, immunocompromised states, when the patient is exposed to viral infection, let's say, with that. So in the future, the patient still can have reactivation of this TB. Kahit po may previous treatment na and mukhang well pa rin yung patient. So we still do need to do the symptomatic and systematic screening for these patients.
Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Karine, sorry, this question is all. This next question is again for you from Miss Shirley May Ambrose. So, is there still a possibility of is there a possibility that scarring, scarring during primary complex can be gone at adulthood? Okay, but yeah. I assume this is scarring, no?
The scarring, yes po. Siguro yung fibrosis din po sa x-rays yan. If ever yung initial presentation po ng patient would be just hilar lymphadenopathies for the primary complex, scarring would not be that evident. But if and when during adulthood, the patient can still again be triggered by immunocompromised state or nutritional malnutrition, for example, probably pwedeng magkaroon po ng reactivation, and yung scarring kasi po parang pwedeng talagang sequelae na ng active TB disease. So, yan po. But there is always a possibility, and kasama po yun sa guidelines for the systematic screening. If we see fibrosis or scarring sa x-rays, we do subject the patient to bacteriologic or expert if ever the patient can give samples.
Agree. Thank you very much. Okay, so do we have questions pa? For me, wala na rin akong questions. It has been a very fruitful afternoon. Thank you for guiding us. Kasi very important po talaga ang topic ng tuberculosis because we're still one of the most infected na mga countries dito. Like you mentioned kanina, roughly around more than 1 million children every year are infected with tuberculosis. So this is a very good venue for that we talk about tuberculosis. Okay, thank you very much. And again, thank you all for attending.
So, thank you, Dr. Jeremy, and to our resource speaker. May pahabol po ako, Doc, because we have pre-registered questions. So, in the context naman po of our audience coming from the community, Doc, baka kailangan lang po nilang marinig from you, our resource speaker po. Pwede po nating sagutin po ito, Doc. So, one pre-registered question, Doc, how can we prevent daw po yung pag-spread ng TB sa kanilang mga bahay, Doc? Napakasimple, Doc, pero coming from you, our experts, mukhang kailangan po nilang marinig po, Doc. Paano nga po ba, Doc, ma-prevent ang TB from spreading sa kanilang mga bahay po?
Good afternoon po. Actually, parang madali lang sagutin talaga yun kung paano i-stop yung spread ng TB. Pero kung ganun kadaling sabihin, sana wala na tayong lectures for this, and wala na talaga yung high endemicity of TB in our country. Pero basically, ang parang pinaka-masasuggest lang namin is the screening for everybody. Kung may nararamdaman tayo, kasi ngayon parang ma-judge tayo if we have cough, colds, ganyan, ma-judge tayo that we have COVID. Pero there are other infectious disease other than COVID. And ito nga po yung naging impact ng COVID-19 sa TB treatment natin ngayon. So parang na-halt yung paghanap ng patient for health services because of the lockdowns, community lockdowns during the pandemic. So now we are, again, kaya na natin lumabas sa mga bahay natin. So first siguro is if we identify ourselves to have these symptoms earlier mentioned, mas magandang tayo na magpusa na mag-seek ng healthcare for this. If not naman po, and if ever ma-identify tayo as TB case, prompt treatment and actually minsan talagang may stigma pa rin. Like yung COVID, may stigma pa rin ang TB. Na kung meron na-diagnose tayo, parang may TB yan, dapat ano. So, siguro yun din yung first, yung takot and the stigma should be erased from us. Kasi for as long as nandito talaga yung disease, mahihirapan talaga tayo na i-combat yun. So, in TB treatment, if we are subjected to TB treatment, short course lang ng 2 weeks, non-infectious na tayo. So, yung parang pag-start pa lang natin ng screening for ourselves, and if ever to get the TB treatment to ourselves sa TB dots natin and to our other health facilities, magiging isang step na po yun sa pag-stop natin ng pag-spread ng disease. Kasi 2 weeks lang of the TB ng treatment ng start ay hindi na magiging infectious yung patients. So, kung tayo din ay kunwari na-diagnose for TB, dapat masabi din natin sa ibang nagkaroon tayo ng close contacts na for them to seek healthcare or screening as well. Kasi unlike, parang COVID lang din yan na kung may contact tracing na dapat maganap. So, dapat we identify ourselves and we identify our close contacts for them to services. May addition ka pa ba?
Okay, to add, of course, a good nutritional status will always decrease the risk of having TB disease. Kaya importante is early screening and diagnosis para sa ating suspected TB patients. And then just as like I have mentioned in the contact investigation, it's important na yung mga household contacts ng ating mga TB patients should also be evaluated nutritionally kasi in pediatric population, there is what we call the anergy. Yung patients cannot mount immune response, kaya ang tendency nagkakaroon ng false negative na PPD results. So it's important na we have to maintain good nutrition sa ating household.
So, ayun. So, thank you, Doc Karin and Doc Arlie. So, I have 2 last questions, Doc. So, eto po, Doc, from the community ulit. So, maliban raw po sa paggagamot ng 6 na buwan, ano po ang dapat gawin para hindi na bumalik ang sakit? At posible po ba, Doc, na pag naggamot na siya ng 6 na buwan, posible rin po bang bumalik ulit yung pagkakaroon ng sakit na TB po?
Hindi na bumalik.
Para hindi na bumalik. Sir, sorry, tama ba yung pagkakakuha ko? Parang anong pwedeng gawin ko para hindi na bumalik yung sakit? Or after treatment, talagang hindi na po babalik? Parang ganun po.
Yes, po.
Okay. So, ang secret kasi sa TB is to get the treatment and take it religiously. 6 months po yun, or other TB cases, it can last for 10 months. So, medyo matagal talagang treatment. Kaya sinasabi din namin po yun sa patients namin na this would be a very long course of treatment. Pero, ang isang secret po talaga dito is yung stay ka religiously with the taking of the medications. Kasi once meron pong mga missed doses, ito po yung nagiging cause ng pag-develop natin ng drug-resistant TB. So kung baga may mga na-miss tayong doses, ganyan, medyo napatagal, mga 1 month or 2 months tayong hindi nag-treat. Kasi sabi ko nga po, mga 2 weeks pa lang sa umpisa ng paggagamot or 1 month pa lang pag-umpisa ng gamot, mafe-feel na ng patient yung positive effect ng gamot. pwedeng gumanda na yung pakiramdam niya, bumalik yung sigla, gumanda yung nutritional status ng patient. So minsan, right there and then, napapatigil sila ng pag-inom ng gamot. So dapat hindi po ganon sa lahat ng mga antibiotics na binibigay. So dapat tuloy-tuloy ng 6 months din natin yung converting to drug-resistant TB. Kasi by that time na magkaroon tayo ng development ng drug-resistant TB, mas lalo naman pong mahihirapan. So kung naman po matapos natin yung mga 6 months or like kunwari 10 months, depende po sa type ng TB sa paggagamutan, may mga test naman po tayo to check kung na-treat na talaga ang patient. So by then, dapat hindi rin po matakot yung pasyente na magsabi na may iba pa siyang nararamdaman or parang hindi gumagaling. So para ma-detect natin earlier yung ganitong situations.
So, thank you, Doc. So, kailangan tuloy-tuloy po yung pag-inom po natin ng gamot kontra tuberculosis. And this is just a clarification, Doc Lan. One last question, Doc. Meron raw po siyang lymphadenopathy sa kanyang chest x-ray na expected po for pneumonia, findings for pneumonia. Hindi raw po ba ito nangangahulugan na may TB or primary complex po?
Okay. Kaya po parang yung sa screening na in-establish ng WHO, yung tatlong basic screening tools, yung symptom screening, chest x-ray, and bacteriologic confirmation or yung expert na sinasabi natin, gene expert, yung pag-submit ng dura, magkakasama po talaga yan. So, hindi po tayo pwedeng mag-rely lang sa chest x-ray kasi meron po talagang mga ibang sakit like pneumonia na pwede pong tulad ng parang hilar lymphadenopathy, parang pareho sila po ng picture of the x-ray of TB. So, talagang dapat from the history and chest x-ray and yung bacteriologic confirmation, parang magkakasama po yan talaga na kumbaga parang TB panel na ginagawa namin or TB package na gawin natin dun sa mga patients na to. Pero, yun din, minsan natatakot tayo na may lymphadenopathies na nakita sa x-ray. Pero, nandito naman po yung mga physicians natin din na dapat adept din na makarecognize kung TB po talaga to or hindi. Meron pong mga cases na we prolong antibiotic treatment like yung mga ibang antibiotics na hindi pang tuberculosis na nakaka-target din, for example, ng mga pneumonias na difficult to treat and later on, nag-i-improve naman po yung mga patients. So, may mga ganun pong criteria tayo bago masabi talaga natin na TB yung patient, hindi lang po sa x-ray natin binabase.
So, napakaklaro po yun. Hindi lang po sa x-ray po natin binabase kung meron pong TB ang isang pasyente. So, to our 100 audience, that ends our open forum portion. Or meron pa pong addition, Doc Arlie?
Wala na po.
So, thank you po to our resource speakers, Dr. Karin and Dr. Arlie. Maraming salamat po for sharing your expertise. And of course, to our moderator po, Dr. Jeremy Marie. Maraming salamat po. And before we proceed with the next portion of our activity for this afternoon, again, to our 102 audience, may I request to if it's okay to kindly open po yung camera po natin to see kung nandito pa po talaga tayo sa webinar. Okay, so moving forward, allow us to express our token of gratitude to our resource speaker and moderator. But before that, allow me to read the content. So, Republic of the Philippines, Department of Health, Baguio General Hospital and Medical Center, Baguio City Certificate of Appreciation is presented to Dr. Karin and Sumera for sharing her time and expertise in the Usapang Salun at sa Komunidad 2023 first special edition with the theme World TB Day held on March 28, 2023. via online Cisco WebEx, signed by the head of the Public Health Unit, Dr. Leomor D. Fangonilo, and of course, our Medical Center Chief of BGHMC, Dr. Ricardo B. Runes. May we give a round of applause to our resource speaker. Same certificate is also awarded to Dr. Arlie C. Balderas. And same certificate is also awarded to Dr. Jeremy Marie A. Del Rosario. So again, to our moderator and to our to our two resource speakers for this afternoon, maraming salamat po for sharing your expertise. Before we proceed with the closing remarks again to our participants, may I invite you, okay, so for next month, we'll be having the Head and Neck Consciousness Week. So that will be the focus of our regular session. Mangyayari po ito sa April 19. So morning po yung regular session natin. Nakapost na po dito sa ating chat box yung registration link. You can now register. And also to our doctors, members of the Philippine Pediatric Society Northern Luzon chapter, nandito na rin po sa chat box ang inyong attendance sheet. You may now answer. Naka-open na po ang inyong ang ating link for attendance sheet, and of course to all the participants, for us to be able to give you your evaluation, for us to be able to give you your certificate of attendance, may I request na pakisagutan po ang ating evaluation link na nakapost na rin po sa ating chat box. And to formally end our activity for this afternoon, may we now give the virtual floor to the head of the Department of Pediatrics of Baguio General Hospital and Medical Center, Dr. Elaine B. Corpus. Good afternoon, Doc. Doc, wala ka pong audio, Doc Elaine.
Hello, can you hear me?
Ayan po, Doc. Meron na po.
So again, thank you, Ryan, for your warm introduction. And good afternoon to everybody. So today, we have again with
Doc Elaine,
Wala,
wala
nakalalo
po.
ko yung
sorry.
pabaha dito.
You can hear me now?
Yes po.
Okay, good afternoon to everyone. So today we have again witnessed another milestone in our lives. During one frolic afternoon, while having a warm camaraderie of the past and present officers of the PPS Northern Luzon Baguio Benguet Group, led by our past president, Dr. Balanag, and Baguio Benguet Board of Director Representative, Dr. PJ Solimen, a feeling sparked or ignited a renewed spirit in us, a reactivation of our vision of service and mission of continuous learning and development for our PPS members, trainees, students, and other healthcare workers in the community came into mind. Through this meeting, we were able to organize, plan, tap, and maximize all the help we can get. We were able to put into reality this special project. With the aid of the Public Health Unit of the Baguio General Hospital and Medical Center, headed by Dr. Leomar Fangonilo, who unselfishly shared this platform. Everything is limitless now. We can possibly reach far and wide our healthcare workers in the far-flung communities in the Cordillera Administrative Region. Thank you very much, Dr. Fangolino, for this opportunity. I am also deeply grateful to all the stakeholders and the organizing committee who made this project into fruition. Again, to our younger generation of esteemed speaker, Dr. Arlie Balderas and Dr. Karen Somera, thank you very much for the updates and the very easy to understand lectures. Thank you so much, doctors. Expect to be called again for your expertise in the future. To our participants who intently listened and watched, I strongly believe we have learned so much from this activity that we can apply in our personal lives and our day-to-day encounters with our patients. Once again, let us move forward with a big smile on our face and a grateful heart as we thread our way to the new normal. As the saying goes, divided we fall, but together, if we think and work as one, and God within our midst, we will be able to face all the challenges that will cross our way. So expect more of these collaborative projects in the future. We ask the support of all the members of the PPS Norlu Baguio Benguet Group in these endeavors. Mabuhay tayong lahat! Mabuhay ang PPS Northern Luzon Baguio Benguet Group, and magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat. Good afternoon. Thank you.
Once again, the head of our Department of Pediatrics of Baguio General Hospital and Medical Center, Dr. Elaine E. Marcos. Thank you, Doc, for that closing remarks.
Thank you.
That ends our activity for this afternoon. So again, before I formally end, reminding everyone to please answer all the links in the chat box. So pakisagutan po yung ating mga link. And see you again on our next session, that is on April 19, to celebrate naman yung ating head and neck consciousness. So with that, maraming salamat po. Stay safe and God bless po sa atin. Bye-bye po.